Hello everyone, my name is Teangi Brown and I'm the Aboriginal Learning Facilitator at the Tasmanian Museum and Art Gallery. And we're here today because we're doing a Science of the Black Box program for National Science Week. But before we do that, I actually need to do an introduction that's explaining the Welcome to Country, or a Welcome to Country. And that's why behind me here you can see I've got the First Nations map, or the Aboriginal Nations of Australia map. And I prefer to call it the First Nations. And this is a really good map just to help you understand that everybody is shaped by the place that they live in. When you think about it and you apply it to where all the ecosystems are, think about where all the desert people in the centre, all the saltwater people, all the freshwater people, all the tropical people, and all the people who live in the colder climates. When you think about this, you can understand just how unique and adapted to every single place that Aboriginal people or First Nations people were in Australia. So it just helps you to understand things a little bit deeper. It does. And how we're all shaped by our ecosystems and by our environments, or how we're all shaped by country itself. We were. Now, I need to tell you my First Nations, I do. And before we do that, though, I'm actually just going to show you the map of Tasmania. I am. Now, this is the traditional nations map of Tasmania. So there were 9 traditional nations in what is now known as Tassie. And there were 48 clans, and there were around about 12 to 14 languages there were. Now, the Welcome to Country I'm going to give to you is not going to be in one of those traditional languages because unfortunately we've lost those languages due to what occurred here. But today we have a modern composite language that I'm going to give you a Welcome to Country in. And I'm just going to flick back to the previous image as well, and then I'll do my Welcome to Country from there. I will. Now, whenever you do a Welcome to Country, you must say who you are and where you come from. So I'll say my mother's side, and then I'll say my father's side. And you've got to say your mother's side first because we all come from our mother. Our mother gave birth to all of us. And when you think about Aboriginal law, the red on the Aboriginal flag, that's Mother Earth. It represents Mother Earth. So that's why we've got to pay respect to the mother, because we all come from our mother. And then we do our father's line. So my mother's side, if you look way up in far north Queensland, I'm Umpala, Kanju, and Koko Yalanji on my mother's side. And in Tasmania, in the northeast of Tasmania, I'm Pintarera, Plaramina, Trawulway. And then over in Victoria, I'm a Bunurong person. That's my father's line. I'm also Maori, Irish, Russian, Scottish, English, and Welsh, I am. And so I say that because it helps you understand the complexity of identity. And I know that I don't just look Aboriginal. I know I've got bright blue eyes and red throughout my hair and olive skin. I understand what I look like. And it's the first thing as an educator, people will say to me, oh, but you don't look that Aboriginal. And then I have to explain to them the complexity of identity and that it's all down to how you see yourself and how you've lived and grown up seeing yourself. And that's what shapes identity. And I feel like this is a part that needed to be added into the welcome. So now I'm going to give you that welcome in Palawakani, but you've got to understand that Palawakani is a composite language, a recreated language from the bits and pieces that were left behind. There were, from the fact that some families kept words with them themselves and passed them down. Early Europeans listened to traditional Aboriginal people and wrote down traditional words. And there's actually heaps of Tasmanian Aboriginal place names throughout the whole of Tasmania. So that's another way we're able to learn. For example, Moona or Taruna, which are very close to here, the Hobart. And the last one is linguistics. Using modern understanding of language and linguistics, we're able to develop the modern Palawakani language, which is for the community today. It's our way of kind of being able to communicate and have a language that we can get around and attach ourselves to. Now I'm going to give you that welcome. Ready? Miladina Nika, Miladina Muanina, Miladina Manamapali, Nara Makara Lumi, Warranta Makara Lumi. Yapakana Rachi Karadi, Pulina, Miladina Pakana Manatu. So what I just said is this country is Muanina country. This country is our country. It has always been here and we have always been here. Hello Tasmanian Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal friends. Please be welcome to Tasmanian Aboriginal country. Which is why we do this. And when you go to the next map, you'll see that this is what we're talking about, the traditional ones. And if you look at the dot, I think it's number 45, which is where Hobart is. That is Hobart, that is. And the traditional name of the people who lived here were the Muanina people. And unfortunately, then, because of what happened, they're no longer around here. And they called this place Nipaluna. And the real traditional name of this place is Nipaluna. And in Palawakani, we've made a Palawakanized version of it. So it can be used as well as Nipaluna. And for the entirety of Tasmania, the Palawakani word is lutruwita. And Palawakani literally means Tasmanian Aboriginal speak. And I say that because it's going to be used a bit in the program. It is. Now, what we need to get into is the black box itself. And the importance of the black box and actually what it is. Essentially, it's a lone resource box filled with Tasmanian Aboriginal objects. Because quite a few years ago, I think it was 2015, we realised we're the Tasmanian Museum and Art Gallery and we need to actually be able to reach other parts of Tasmania. So we developed this box and we called it the black box because of many reasons. Because it holds quite a bit of information and because it's a giant black box, and also because we want to reclaim the name black for Tasmanian Aboriginal people. So there's a few reasons why we named it that, but this is just one of the black boxes. We currently have 4 of these, we do. So we send the black box out to the school and then we beam through Teams or through Zoom or something like that, and I actually give them a tour here from the museum. And I take them around the exhibition, giving them context to all the objects that are sitting inside this box in their classroom. So it's a way of making sure that this information that's in here is interpreted correctly and people can't misinterpret it and misunderstand it. So it's really us kind of interpreting our own culture. We figured for a while, wait a second, maybe it's time for Tasmanian Aboriginal people to talk about ourselves for once, which is why we made the black box, really, so we can talk about ourselves. And on the inside of the black box, we made very, very culturally specific objects that had makers that made them, elder makers is the best way to put it, who were really quite knowledgeable and respectful. And so we got them to make these here so they'll have heaps of specialty to the objects that are in the black box. They're not just things that I made. They're actually made by Tasmanian Aboriginal elders or artists and makers. They actually have a story attached to them. They do. So that's why they're quite powerful as well. Now, the very first thing that we need to kind of talk about in the box is Rikawa when it comes to objects. Before we do that, I'm going to say one thing. If you do have any comments, please do put them into the YouTube section because we're going to be having a Q&A and I'll be there kind of monitoring the questions for a couple of hours after. So I will reply to as many as I possibly can if you have any questions. So please do feel free to do that. But what you can see behind me here is in fact a bull kelp water carrier or a Rikawa water carrier. And that is made by Auntie Leonie Dixon. And now Auntie Leonie is, unfortunately, she's no longer with us. So this is a very special object because the maker doesn't exist anymore. And so it's a special piece. It is, with a special story. And I've actually got some kelp here. And this is actually from one of the black boxes that we take to school. So we show them, this is the kelp when it's dried and hard. And this is it when it's still fresh. So if you look, it's really, really flexible. Almost as flexible as rubber. It is. And so it dries after, say, 2 to 3 days. So you can see there in the image where it looks natural and flowing. That's it here. So it's very flexible. And then the process here is oxidization. Because once it hits oxygen, so the same as if you think about it, you bite an apple and it goes red. Or if you see rust on metal, that's oxidization, when oxygen touches a fresh material. And in this case, what it does, it makes the kelp go as hard as a rock. It does. And quite often you step on this and it hurts your feet if you've ever seen it on the beach. You do. One of the amazing things about bull kelp, though, is when you shape it when it's soft, you shape it into the shape of the basket, like you saw the one just before that Auntie Leonie had made, then think about how you could use that to carry water. If you want to go inland, you can use that to carry fresh water. There's some made, I think the largest one could hold around about 6 quarts, which I think is almost 6 litres. That's what the colonial people said. So that's one of the biggest ones that they'd seen made by a traditional Aboriginal person. And one of the very, very interesting things to do with bull kelp is that all of the vitamins and minerals inside the seaweed leaks and leaches into the water. So when you drink that, you get all those vitamins and minerals that make you very healthy. And the most important vitamin or mineral you get is iodine. It is something that comes out of the bull kelp. And you can also actually eat kelp just fresh as itself, which is something I do not doubt that the old people would have done, with eating bull kelp itself. And just to add, if you look here, I've actually got a bull kelp water carrier made by the sister of Auntie Leonie, who you just saw the image before. This is made by Auntie Verna Nichols. This is her basket that she made. So this is the sister to the the sister bull kelp basket to the one I just showed you before on the green screen. This one here is. So you can see those jagged pieces of bull kelp. That's what we send to the kids to give them understanding of the hard and the soft. Now, we're going to talk about bush foods, or a better way to talk about is seasonal foods. And the MuttonBird, or the Yula, is probably one of the most important things to talk about culturally, because it's something that's connected and happened throughout all of Tasmanian Aboriginal history. And it connects me as a Tasmanian Aboriginal person to the past. So it's a really important practice to me. It is. And here, if we can see it, I'll try and make it so it can be seen. This is actually a baby, just like what you've got there. That's a baby on the screen. The babies are twice the size as their parents they are, and the fluff down is something that they'll work off of their own accord. MuttonBirds are a really, really important seasonal resource. When you think about it, that it comes in at autumn time and then winter follows, and you're getting a protein that's full of really, really healthy fats, such as omega-3s. So that's going to make your body quite healthy. You can put a layer of fat onto you as well. And you can actually see in this image behind me, that's actually my father, not with a baby MuttonBird, but with an adult. Because sometimes early in the morning, their parents are still in the hole feeding their babies. Some of them are late and they haven't flown out to ocean to go and get another feed. Because the way MuttonBirds work is, for a certain amount of time, they fly in over night time and they feed their babies in the burrow. Then before morning comes, they fly off. But sometimes a MuttonBird, an adult, might stick around for a bit. So that's what this image is. It's my father who's found an adult. And the way we help them take off is we pull them out and we put their wings together like this. And then we go, and they go up in the air, and then they pop their wings out like this. And then the MuttonBird flies off to go and gather with the rest of the MuttonBirds out in the ocean to go and get a feed. And then it'll be back that afternoon to feed its baby, it will. The other name for MuttonBird is a short-tailed shearwater, and the Latin name was Pufnus tenurostrus, but I think now it's Ardena tenurostrus, so they've changed their name now. And in this image here, you can see some of the adult birds of the night time who've come in, sitting on the rocks on the island. These images here are of Big Dog Island or Great Dog Island in the Bass Strait. Now, when you catch a MuttonBird, and it sounds quite horrible, but you've got to put your hand down a burrow underground, and you've got to pull that MuttonBird out of that burrow, and then you've actually got to break its neck with your bare hands. It can be considered quite brutal, but in saying that, as a Tasmanian Aboriginal person, since I was a very young boy, I've known where meat came from. I understood that if you wanted to eat meat, something had to die. So for me, as a Tasmanian Aboriginal person, I found it as a really important lesson when I was a very young boy to understand just the process of this. And so when I see this image of my father with MuttonBird slung over his shoulder, it just reminds me, because I was about 10 when that image was taken. So I can actually remember the day. I was there on that day when this picture was taken. And the reason why he's got it slung over the shoulder is because he wants to keep the stomach contents inside the bird. Because what we do next is we get that MuttonBird and we put it into something called a spit that we put on our shoulders and we carry it back into the shed. And the reason why is we want all that stomach contents. And this here is the oil, and that's the rotten fish. So that represents the stomach contents. And the MuttonBird you saw before, and in fact this MuttonBird right here, that jar is some of its stomach contents. I took this out of this bird because I was the one who dispatched it, and I ate it, and I gave its flesh to gave its skin to a taxidermist. I did. So that's my story and how I connect to these objects that go out in the black box. So it's kind of my connection to the story. It is. And this is the reason why we gather the MuttonBird oil, because then we put it into a big barrel and then we purify it. So it goes from this mixed in with the rotten fish to this pure MuttonBird oil, which is one of the highest concentrations of omega-3 found in the natural world. It's a pretty amazing substance, it is, and extremely healthy. It is very, very good for you. Now, if you've ever heard of something known as a grass tree or a yucca gum or a Xanthorrhoea australis, some people call them, they've got quite a few names. And I prefer to call them a grass tree or even a kangaroo tail. That's something I grew up with as a kangaroo tail. But as a bush food, it's something that's really, really important to eat. And not even necessarily even to eat. It's more just important to know about the many things that can come from this tree, because it is known as the tree of life. So you can get a sweet drink and sugars out of the nectar, out of the grass tail. That tail can also be used as tinder. It can also be used as to carry fire. And I've known them being used as woomers, spear throwers as well, depending on where you go. I've heard quite a few things. Inside the kind of the base of the leaves is a really, really white pith, which is really, really good for chewing on. It kind of it gives you some sugar and gives you carbohydrates. So it's quite good as well. But unfortunately, if you take that out and you rip it apart, you can kill the tree. So it's all about understanding that you've got to take just a little bit and then it will continue to live. If you take it all, then it dies. So it's about that understanding of balance. Whenever you consume, and when you go out and get bush foods, it's not about stripping the forest. It's about doing it balanced with understanding. That's what it is. And the next image you're going to see is, for those who've ever seen yakka gum and how it sits out in the forest, you might have seen these rounds before, because this is actually the round of the inside of the tube of a yakka gum. And the fronds, if you look at that circle, you can see they're really glistening, because that's where the sap lives. And because yakka gum only germinates if it's burnt, you need to burn the yakka, and then it will germinate and spread seeds and regrow. But when that happens, all of that sap that's in that ring, it leaks out, it does, and then goes into tiny little balls, and they fall down off the side. And that's what that ball is in the top left of the image. Is they're the balls of the yakka gum, or the sap. So it's also when the name hard yakka comes from. Oh, it's hard yakka. It comes from this plant. It does. Now, this next plant, I added it in not because of it has really anything to do with the black box, except for it kind of does, but it also doesn't. I added it in because, for me as a Tasmanian Aboriginal person, it's something that I've grown up with my whole life, seeing every forest and every time I went to a beach, everywhere. These trees just happen to be in every place, which kind of makes sense considering they're a native food, and that the old people probably put them into all of these locations a long time ago. They did. When I say old people, traditional Aboriginal people, I mean people before colonisation or at the point of colonisation. And this tree is just something that really kind of connects to me, because as a kid I can remember loving and picking all the berries whenever I went to the beach. So this next image you'll see is actually the close-up of what they look like hanging on the tree, which a few of you might have seen them before, the tiny little native cherries. And they're peculiar too, because the seed actually grows on the outside, it does. And it's got a really kind of sweet but bitter flavour. And also it depends on where the tree is living and existing and how much nutrients it's taken out of the earth, which depends on how tasty the fruit is. So there's many, many variables when it comes to bush foods and understanding bush foods. This is just to show you just how, just in a hand, the whole, just the volume you can get of just, a couple of fronds. And when it's really in season, you actually get quite a bit, you can. And it's a really, really good place that you can get sugars, it is. And it's really quite tasty. I also wanted to talk about the native cherry, simply because it is something that traditional waddies were made out of. This here isn't a traditional waddy. This waddy is made in modern times. They're also known as throwing sticks, and in traditional, they were known to be made out of the native cherry tree, and that's why I thought I'd just bring the waddy out, just to mention that some sticks and spears or waddies will be used from that timber. And in another black box, not in this one, but in another one, we do have a digging stick or throwing stick inside of it. We do, which would have been made out of in traditional times. Yeah. Now, this is a really kind of special piece to me. One, because my father and four of my cousins were the ones who built it, but also just as a Tasmanian Aboriginal person. Because when you walk into Ningana Tanapri, which is the Aboriginal gallery we have here at the museum, and Ningana means to give knowledge and understanding, so kind of that's what it does. First time you see the canoe, it gives you knowledge and understanding, and it takes you on a journey. Because if you look at the carpet, it looks like the ocean, and then it takes you on a journey anti-clockwise, going from island to island to island to learn the history about how we're still around today, and how we aren't extinct, and how that's just a misconception and a myth. So that's the purpose of the gallery, to say we are here. Now, if you look at the canoe we just did previously and you compare it to this one here, you understand that, one, this has been drawn through the lens of a European person. So we've got to remember it's probably not exactly 100% what they saw, but it's just how they interpret it. That's one thing. Secondly, is if you look at it, you actually see how that boat or that canoe is sitting in the water, and see how either side it's got the front and the back are up, which kind of talks about how, that looks like it would be quite good for going through waves. And when you look at the history, you find out that the old people went as far as Matsaka Island and Pedra Blanca, which is, at least 20 kilometres off the coast of Tasmania, plus they are. So it's a pretty big journey doing a canoe like that. And when you look at this image, you can see, that makes sense that they would have that up. So they would be able to go through waves and go through a bit more harder weather. Now, that's the stringy bark itself and how it goes around the outside of the tree and how you'd strip it off. And see, the thing is, you use the outside bark to roll into the bundles, and underneath the outside bark, there's the lighter bark on the inside that has much more water content, it has more moisture, and so it's more flexible. So you get the outer bark and you roll that into your tube in your bundles, and then the inner bark you use to tie it all up and strap it, which in the next image I think we might be able to see that. Yeah, so if you see here, so if you see how there's the stringy bark bundled in, and then that lighter bark that you can see used as strapping, well, as it dries, that lighter the lighter bark that's got more moisture shrinks and pulls it tighter together. It does. And when you look at this canoe here, this is actually an image of the small scale test canoe that we did, because the one that we had in the gallery, we couldn't put that in the ocean, so we had to make a smaller scale one at the exact same time so we could actually test, if it was buoyant, if it could float properly, if it balanced, just those basic things. And so that's what that one there was. And the next image, you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. So this is my father testing that canoe back in, I think, 2006 or 2007. And it was a really good just experiment for him to say, wow, it actually does float. It doesn't go unstable and just flip around. Which, when you think about it, it makes sense, because there's a central bundle and there's two bundles on either side that act as stabilizers, so it doesn't spin around. So when you actually think about it, you can see there was some sense and there was some logic put into the building of these canoes. There was. And this is one of those images that kind of just shows you the science behind it. And this is an image that actually comes from Pitt River Museum in the United Kingdom, because they've got one of our little models over there in that museum, they do. And as you can see, there's the top canoe, which has got the two side bundles and the centre bundle. And then the one on the bottom, that's showing you the centre bundle itself. And then the bottom one is showing you the two side bundles and how they'll look. They also would probably be wrapped in a bit more bark, but it's just a good diagram of the way it would look. And if you look to the right there, you'll see it has the circle with the two circles on either side to show that buoyancy. Yeah, you'll see that. And this is actually a paperbark canoe, because we've got to remember the people and where they lived would use the materials close to them to make an object. So, if you're up in the north of Tassie where there's if you're on the river system of the Tamar River and there's heaps of tea tree or paperbark around you, you'd be using the paperbark and going somewhere else to find something else. And paperbark's really good too, because it's very water resistant. So actually the water just beads off and comes off it. So it's something that would have been used in the north to make canoes. And this one here was made by Uncle Rex Greeno as a model. And this is a canoe that kind of really talks to us as a community today. It does. It's actually an artistic installation that's in Franklin Square, which is here in Hobart. And it's a metal canoe being surrounded by a wooden whaling ship. And it talks about kind of the concept of the fact that as Tasmanian Aboriginal people, we come and connect to this story of we only come from the sealers who came and stole Aboriginal women in the Bass Strait. So it's that connection to the story of the Strait. And it's in just an artistic object, it is. And if you ever do get the opportunity in Franklin Square, I do recommend to go and see it, because it's quite thought-provoking. It is, just to think about. Now, I have to kind of say goodbye, and I'd just like to say thank you so much for watching the science of the black box. And remember that we have got plenty of events going on for National Science Week, so you can look up plenty of other information. And I will be around for Q&A for the next couple of hours or so. So you're welcome to put any comments into the YouTube section there. And I would really appreciate any of those because I'd love to have a chat and a conversation. But I'd just like to say thank you very much for if you were listening in, and I really do hope that I was able to help you think about this information a bit more.